Welcome back to the video lecture series for Introduction to the Art of Programming using Scala. In this video, we're going to start talking about the Java I/O package and looking at I/O streams. So, in the first half of the book, we did input and output using text with the Scala, first the scala.io.source, and then we also looked briefly at java.util.scanner. But those work very well for text-based input. We're going to talk now about java.io, which gives us some additional capabilities and also the ability to work with binary data so that we can do things more flexibly. It'll also grow into the next chapter where we talk about networking. So first let's start off and let's look in the API. So we're going to the java.io package, and inside of this package we have a number of interfaces and classes. And we'll start off by looking at the fundamental input stream and output stream. So there's input stream, there's output stream. These are abstract, so you cannot instantiate these directly. There are subtypes that we will instantiate. But it's interesting to look at the functionality for these. Basically, an input stream has the ability to read bytes. So you can pass it an array of bytes and it will fill that array of bytes, or you can read 1 byte at a time. It returns a full int because negative values indicate that the read didn't work. You can also have it read into the middle of an array. But that's the basic functionality of an input stream. It reads arrays of bytes. At a fundamental level, all the data on the computer is a bunch of bytes, so you can read whatever you want. It's just the question of converting it from a bunch of bytes into the structure that you actually want. Output stream is fairly analogous, except instead of reading stuff in, it writes out arrays of bytes, and you can write out a single byte, which gets passed in as an int, but it will only write out the lowest byte of that int. In addition to the input stream and the output stream, there's another class that is worth specifically mentioning in java.io, and that is file. And we've seen file previously, but we didn't really look at it in any detail. This class has a lot of very helpful methods in it. Most of the time you'll be making it just by passing it a path name. You can also use it to build relative paths, so you give it a file that represents a directory and then what you want inside of that directory. But using this, when you set one of these up to refer to a file, you can ask information about the permissions on that file. You can do things like set it to delete, delete on exit, so when the program terminates it will delete the files that you've tagged that way. You can ask if a file already exists, so before you try to open something or create something, if it already exists, you can possibly prompt the user. You can get the path information about it. One of the ones that I find very useful is that you can get a list of all the files in a directory, or either as a bunch of strings or as an array of files. You can also ask for how long a file is, which we'll actually use that in just a minute. If the file refers to a directory that doesn't exist yet, you can call mkdir. You can actually make something that is multiple directories nested down where many of them don't exist, and mkdirs will create all of them for you, and you can change the permissions on files. So there are quite a few helpful things that you can do here with your files using the java.io.file class. So it's a good thing to have in the back of your head. Now, the thing about the input stream and the output stream being abstract is that we can't instantiate them. You can't actually make an input stream. You have to make some subtype of input stream. And the first example that I want to go through is looking at using the input stream and possibly output stream for dealing with files, because that is probably one of our most common use cases here. So there are classes for a file input stream and a file output stream. The file input stream inherits from input stream, but when you read from it, it takes data from the file. Similarly, a file output stream can be created and it will write data out to the file when you call the write methods. So if we go to Eclipse, we can set up a little example here. And we'll have it so that it so we'll play with streams. I'm going to tell it to go ahead and add a main for us. And at least the very first thing that I want to do is to have it maybe print the contents of a file based upon what it reads from an input stream. Now, we could do this in a few ways. We could read through byte by byte to do this, or we could read a large array of bytes. I'm actually going to do the latter. And just because I can and it's not too hard to do, let's go ahead and let's make a file chooser. And so notice this imported Scala swing file chooser. Chooser.show open dialog null, and we need to check to make sure they actually open something. If that equals, let's try file chooser dot result dot approve. That means they actually chose a file for us, and what I want to do is I want to read that in. So there is a selected file, and notice that the type of this is a Java IO file. As I've mentioned before, we've used these before, we just didn't look in detail at all of the methods that are inside of them. And I can take that file and use it to create myself a file input stream. So I'm going to make a new file input stream. I'm going to wrap it around that file. We'll import there. Because I just opened a file, I want to be a good programmer and close it, and so I'll type that immediately so I don't forget it. Now I would like to read in the entire contents of that file into an array. So I'm going to make an array, I'll call it buff, short for buffer, which is going to be a new array of bytes of however long the file is. Now, turns out this is where I can do file.length and ask for it. We have an error here because it turns out that you can only make, when you make arrays, you have to pass them an int, and length gives us a long. So I'm just going to convert that to an int, and then I call read on that buffer. At that point I can close the file because I've read my data in, and just to make sure that it works, I'm going to print line out a new string that's built using that buffer. There's a constructor for string that takes arrays of bytes. So this is a very simple little program that uses an input stream, and if we run this, we have the ability, so let's go programming using Scala. Pick one of our programs from earlier, basic methods. There we go. Okay, so we read in that file and printed out the results. And this is a very simple usage of an input stream and what we can do with it. We could have done this just as well with a source. The advantage here is if this had been a binary file, reading into an array of bytes would have been nicer, though we wouldn't have wanted to convert it to a string in that case. We could also make this so that it copied the contents of the file by creating a file output stream and then writing stuff out to that. We will Come back in the next video and we'll talk about what could go wrong with this and how we can deal with that.